1998 through 2002 Honda Accord with the 3.0 liter engine, power steering pump, and the 2 drive belt replacement. I'm Brian Nessa from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing those out. Here is the part numbers for the power steering pump. It's a remanufactured pump. Also the 2 drive belts, the power steering, and the alternator belt that we're going to be replacing. I will link up the parts and the tools that I use in this video in the description. That way if you need to pick any of those up, you can find those there. The first thing we need to do is to get our vehicle up in the air. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands. You want to get the front of the vehicle up high enough to take off the right front wheel, but low enough where we can still work on it up here on the top. Now that you got the tire removed, we need to get this inner splash shield here removed. It's held on with a clip here and a clip that goes up vertical right here. So you're going to pop these 2 clips out with the clip pliers. Once you get this top one undone, then we're just going to get the one here. It comes up vertical. Go ahead and pop that out. And then once you get these 2 clips pulled out, then you can just take the panel here and pull it downwards. And I'm just going to tuck it underneath the frame here and just kind of hold it in place there. Now that we got the shield down, we're going to start working on getting the belt out. If you can look right here, it's where the belt tensioner is located. So we need to put a 14 millimeter wrench on here, and we need to rotate this counterclockwise. I'm using an extra long ratcheting wrench here. It's 14 millimeter on one end and 12 millimeter on the other. These are about 18 inches long and make quick work of these. So once you put the wrench on there, you're going to rotate it counterclockwise like that, and that'll spring the tension off, pull the belt off. I'll be sure to put a link for the wrenches in the description of the video. Now you can fish the belt out all the way. You may have to go up top and unhook it from the alternator. This is the alternator belt that we're removing. For me, the power steering reservoir was kind of in my way, so what I did was took a little screwdriver and pried right here on the edge of the tab, and then that will allow you to pull the reservoir up and off the little mount here. And that gave me enough room to push the belt downwards and out the bottom. Now we're going to work on getting the power steering belt off. And if you look at the power steering belt, it's routed through the middle of the upper motor mount here. So we have to take this portion of the motor mount out to get the belt off. You're also going to want to pull this little plastic cover here off. So just pull it straight up. It's just mounted on some rubber tabs. And then you can just kind of flex the power steering hose out of your way and get the cover off. So now we're going to start unbolting the motor mount. You're going to need a floor jack and slide it underneath the vehicle, and then use a block of wood. And if you look here, I got the block of wood and the floor jack right underneath the oil pan. And what we're going to do is jack it up until there just slightly takes the pressure off the engine. So just a couple little pumps, and that'll slightly lift the engine up a little bit. That's all you need to do. So I'm going to get this power steering reservoir out of our way. And before I do that, I'm going to suck all the fluid out. I'm using a fluid extractor here. And we want to suck out as much of that fluid as you possibly can. If you don't have something like this, you can use a turkey baster. It works really well. After that, you can remove the hose clamp here off the hose, the feed hose here, and then you pull the hose off the pump. And a little bit of fluid is going to drain out as normal. You can use a rag, or I'm just going to clean it up here in a minute. So I went ahead and popped the hose off and pulled the reservoir off and pushed it over here onto the side out of our way. Now that I got the reservoir out of the way, the next step is to get this cable here, the wiring harness is mounted on this bracket, out of our way. On the wire loom holder, there's a little tab. You can flare that out of your way, and then you can pull it off the bracket. Now we can take out the 14 millimeter bolts there and the one 17 millimeter bolt holding the going through the main motor mount here. Here I'm just using a cordless ratchet to remove this bolt. Go ahead and take that 17 millimeter bolt here out and go ahead and slide it out. The floor jack underneath is supporting the engine, so you don't have to worry about it. Then after that, I'm using a 14 millimeter with a long extension. This happens to be a 1/2 drive, and I'm going to use my impact gun here. This is the mid-torque Milwaukee mid-torque impact gun. Go ahead and take those 2 14 millimeter bolts out, and then once you get the 2 14 millimeter bolts out, then the bracket you can just lift up and slide it out like this and set it aside. Now with that bracket removed, we can get the belt off and we can get it out of the car. Now with a deep 12 millimeter socket and a ratchet like this, we're going to loosen up the bolt here on the back of the pump. It's the furthest one back here. So you're going to loosen this bolt up here, a couple threads. Once you got it loosened, then we're going to loosen up the one on the front of the pump. The one on the front of the pump here is a 12 millimeter nut. So we're going to loosen this up a few threads To loosen that up, I used a little extension and a deep socket here to get on the nut right here. Now we're going to crack that free, and we're just going to loosen it up a couple threads. Once we get that loosened up a couple threads, right here is the adjuster here. So you need a 12mm socket here. You're going to put it on the adjuster screw here, and you're going to rotate it counterclockwise. And as you rotate it counterclockwise, the belt on the power steering pump here is going to loosen up. So after 7 or 8 rotations, the pump should be loose enough where you can slip the belt off. Now you can slip it off the crank below and then work the belt completely out of the vehicle. On the crank pulley down here, you'll notice it has 2 grooves, an inner and an outer. The inner groove is where the power steering belt rides. It's a little bit more difficult to get that out, but you can fish this out. When we go back together, I'll provide a diagram to show you how the belts route. So go ahead and remove that. Now we can remove the nut, the 2 nuts and the bolt on the pump here completely. After the nuts are removed, we need to remove the high pressure power steering hose. It's held on with 2 10mm bolts. You go ahead and remove these 2 10mm bolts, and you can just wiggle the hose and it will pop off the pump. Once you get the hose off, you can just tuck it off to the side. And now we can go ahead and lift the power steering pump here out. If the AC hose here is in the way, you can slightly flex it out of your way to pull it out. If you look here, this is the adjuster screw that we're adjusting up and down that adjust the belt tension on the alternator. So now what we're going to do is we're going to clean this area out. Most likely we're replacing this because this was all leaking. So you want to clean this out thoroughly with some brake clean and wash it all off. I have a bucket underneath the vehicle catching all the runoff. You can do this afterwards with a pressure washer. That works really well too. Now we're going to prep the new pump with the old pump. If you look here, this piece does not come with the new one, so we need to transfer that over, and we need to put new O-rings on that, on the adapter, and also the O-ring on the high pressure hose. So you're going to take the 10mm bolt out, take the adapter off, put on a new O-ring. It takes the smaller green O-ring, and you're going to put that onto the pump and then tighten that up. So the larger O-ring that comes with the pump needs to go onto the high pressure hose here. So you're going to want to change out this O-ring here on the high pressure line here with the new one. And then once you got that changed out, we need to take the pulley off the old pump and transfer it over to the new one. I'm just using the impact gun and pull the nut off like this, and then you just pull the pulley off. It has splines that it's mounted on. Now you can take the new pump here, slide the pulley on there. I like to put a little bit of thread locker on the threads of the bolt here. This will prevent this from vibrating loose and coming back off. So just a little bit of thread locker on the nut here, and then we can thread it on. Once you got it threaded on, then I just use the impact gun and I just hammer it down a few light impacts. That's all it takes. So now we're going to take the new pump and put it down in position. The adjuster screw right here has to go through the front ear of the power steering pump. So this little stud right here has to go through that front ear right here. So you're going to hook that first, and then you're going to start the bolt on the back here second after you get that front one started. So I slid it down into position, started the bottom bolt and the back one. To put the nut on, I put a piece of paper in a socket, and then that holds the nut in position and allows me to get down in this tight area here and start the nut onto the little stud there. So once you got that done, we can go ahead and feed the belt down. So you're going to feed it over the mount and down onto the crank pulley below. Remember, it goes on the inside groove, so we're going to feed it down like this. Once it's wrapped around the crank pulley and around the power steering pump, now you can take the adjuster here and screw it clockwise, and that'll pull the tension out of the slack out of the belt and tighten it up. You want to check the tension, and then if it's too loose, you can tighten it up a couple more threads, check the tension. If it's still too loose, you can just go back and forth until you get it right. Then you can tighten the bottom bolts, the nut and the bolt, once the tension is right. And after that, we're going to take the high pressure hose and put it onto the pump and start the 2 10mm bolts and tighten those up. Now you can feed the motor mount bracket back down into position over the mount and line up the bolt holes and start all 3 of the bolts, the 17mm and the 2 14mm. I use the little impact gun here to run them down until they're snug, and then I tighten them up by hand. I tried looking up the torque specs and I could not locate the specs for you guys. So go ahead and tighten those up snug, and then you can use your hand ratchet here and tighten them up about a quarter turn more. And you're going to do that for all 3, the 14mm and the 1 17mm nut down here. After that, we can take the wire loom here and put it back on the bracket. Now we can feed our alternator belt into position. I'm going to route it the way this diagram shows here. So you're going to route it from the up top and route it around the alternator first, and then feed it down towards the compressor. And then we're going to go down below, and we're going to route around the crank pulley last. So as we get down here, we're going to pull the slack out. We're going to take the tensioner here and rotate it counterclockwise, and then slip the belt onto the crank pulley. After that, we can take the lower splash shield and put that back up into position and start the 2 clips that held it on. You can put the front wheel on and torque that down. I also removed the block of wood and floor jack. Now I'm going to feed the power steering reservoir back into position and start the hose, and make sure the clamp is on there. Now you need to fill the reservoir up with power steering fluid. You need to use Honda approved power steering fluid. I will link up genuine Honda fluid in the description of the video. So we're going to fill it all the way up until it's completely full. And then once it's completely full, you can go ahead and start the vehicle. And when you start the vehicle, the level may drop down and you may have to top it off. I like to let the vehicle idle for a few minutes before I operate the power steering. So once it idles for a few minutes, then you can take the steering wheel here and rotate the steering wheel from lock to lock. So you'll go all the way left, all the way right. And once you've done that a couple times, then you can go back in the engine bay and double check the power steering fluid level. And that'll complete the job. I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos. Encourage you to subscribe. Invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. If you're interested in supporting the How To Automotive YouTube channel, the best way to do that is by purchasing t-shirts and stickers. There will be links for that in the description also. Thank you guys for watching.